A wide expanse of shrubs, sagebrush, and bunch grasses is dotted with juniper trees and framed by low mountains. Title: 1031 Exchanges. What is a 1031 exchange? Inner Office, Toya Butler, Senior Advisor and Counsel for First American Exchange.
So a 1031 exchange, it comes out of a section of the tax code, Section 1031. And it is, I will call it an incentive program for folks who own real estate and are selling real estate. If they don't want to pay tax on the gain and don't want to recapture depreciation, they can go out and buy replacement real estate that will be held for investment. So it's a mechanism of folks who are owning real estate to stay invested in real estate. And as long as they stay invested in real estate, they get a deferral of those tax bills. Tax bill doesn't go away. It's just deferred into the replacement property. The seller is selling something that has all these gains. And if they just sell that property, they have to pay tax on the gain. And they have to pay recapture of depreciation, which if they want to buy more real estate, it will reduce the amount of available cash to buy that next property. So if they can defer the payment of those taxes, it leaves effectively more cash in their pocket to leverage into the bigger and better property that better suits their purposes.
A ponderosa pine stretches toward the sun at Aspen Valley Ranch, Deschutes County, Oregon. Text: combining a 1031 with an easement. A view above the 18,000-acre ranch with rolling hills. Jim Woods, owner.
A working lands easement. So it means that, we will continue to farm, ranch. As my brother said, it's pretty much the way we've always done it, except we have, in effect, sold the development rights. And with that money, we ourselves use that to purchase 900 acres of in-holdings that I'm looking at over here, which we surround on 3 sides. And there was no way in today's real estate market that even with a buoyant cattle market that we would be able to afford to purchase that property. So with the funds we received by doing the easement, we acquired that and have added it, to our holdings, and it's slated to go into the easement as well.
Natasha Bellis, Conservation Director for Deschutes Land Trust. The snowy peak of Mount Jefferson rises above the hills behind her.
The Land Trust has been working with Jim Wood of Aspen Valley Ranch for about the last decade. Jim approached the Land Trust eager to do a conservation easement. He lives in Post, Oregon, which is just outside of Prineville, and there is quite a bit of development pressure coming into that valley.
Development pressure and growth in Central Oregon is huge, and I watched how these ranches evolved to where they became turned around and went full swing and became working, self-sustaining units. And we were starting to see them getting fragmented again into hobby ranches, hunting preserves, and tax havens. And so I'd read about working lands conservation easements that were going on 25, 30 years ago in states like Colorado, later in California. And so I thought that this would be a really good tool to preserve not just this ranch. My goal is to see this snowball into the other ranches in the whole Post-Paulina Valley. I have 2 sisters and a brother, so we're a family partnership. They're minority absentee owners, essentially. So I, in theory, could use some of this monies to buy them out when they no longer want to be part of this. The other huge economic benefit is I'm concerned that who's the next generation? Who's coming up? I'm not going to live forever. If I strip the development rights off of it, I've reduced the value, quote unquote, of the property, which then can make it more affordable to somebody else to get into.
When Jim was first interested in a conservation easement, it was one of the first that the Land Trust had done, even though the process, I think, took longer than he had anticipated, longer than we had anticipated. His commitment to the project and seeing that land under easement really strengthened our relationship and brought us to where we are today, where we're at this moment where we have funding and we're ready to go. We have one easement already on the land and are ready to roll into the next phases.
A breeze blows through the scrub on a hillside. Toya.
The sale of an easement is processed like any other 1031 exchange. Typically, our client is selling that easement to some party. The sale agreement goes to a title company, and the title company then will be prepared for the closing. So it's a normal sale of real estate for processing purposes.
When we were involved in the easement and we used that money to purchase the 900 acres of in-holdings, I tried very hard to make it a 1031 exchange. We did talk to a tax attorney, accountant, and a 1031 exchange agent, and it was very doable. We were starting to line up the ducks, but the family that had the in-holdings for sale, the gentleman was quite elderly, and he actually ultimately passed away, and they needed to consummate the deal then and there. And that was most unfortunate, because 1031s are very time sensitive. You have a very small window in which to execute it.
There's a lot of regulations governing how and when to use a 1031. One of those is timing. You have 45 days to identify a replacement property, 180 days to actually purchase that property. And so you really have to know sort of in advance what property you're looking at, because those deadlines come soon. And so that timing just didn't line up for Jim under phase one. And we've learned from that and are looking at trying to do it under phase two.
The worst rule in 1031 is they have only the first 45 days of the 180 to identify the replacement property. 45 days is too short. Whether we have huge inventory or currently limited inventory, it's never been enough time. 45 days to find something. Furthermore, at day 45, most of our people can only list 3, the one they want and 2 backups, or the 2 they want and 1 backup. 1031s are not audited that often, but when they are, it's hugely around compliance with the 45-day deadline, because it is just too short, and people have historically tried to find a way around it, and there really is no way around the 45 other than a federally declared disaster, God forbid, hurricane, fires, feast or famine. Only then do we get extensions.
The purchase price of this place, your base was dated back to around early to mid 1960s. And so the capital gains tax kicked in our case. You can offset it. Again, 1031 exchange is a good tool to, not have to pay capital gains, because you're essentially trading like for like and just adding to your land base. I would advise anybody going into this to work with your accountant, a tax attorney, and there are actually attorneys that deal in specifically with conservation easements.
Jim's dusty vehicle bounces over the rough roads. Gray, scraggly deadwood lies scattered among the green shrubs and trees.
When it's a sale of an easement, that's usually a long closing process. So in terms of that 45 days, typically our seller handling with the sale of an easement, they will have found their replacement property well before day 45, because their sale is closing, but they've been working on that deal for months in advance. We can close the easement on a Monday and give us 3 or 4 days later, we're ready to buy whatever replacement property. So frankly, the timing can be better sometimes with these easements, simply because of the long lead time up to the sale of that easement itself.
In his office, Jess Sarsfield, Relationship Manager, Ag West Farm Credit.
With the 1031 exchange, the lender's role is going to be pretty normal in the sense that funds are being requested on a loan for a real estate purchase. The thing that the future landowner is going to want to communicate with the lender is that they are doing a 1031 exchange, and so there are some deadlines that need to be met. If you have an existing relationship with the lender, that's going to help things a lot, and setting those expectations up front with your lender will be important. In a 1031 exchange where you're using funds from an easement and those funds haven't materialized yet, the lender can be ready to pull the trigger on their side and be ready with funds. But really what you want to be focusing on, I think, is getting the timing right with when funds are going to come from that easement. You're going to be required to use a facilitator. And from the lender's point of view, it may be a good idea or nice to have a facilitator that is familiar with your lender, or at the very least familiar with ag lending or at least lending.
I need to touch on the reinvestment rules. First one is take the net cash and roll all of that through. If they don't want to pay any tax at all, we're going to use all of that toward the purchase of new property. Reinvest the cash. The second rule, which can be surprising to folks and not happy-making, is that 1031 is not a way to get free and clear. If there's a mortgage on the old property, they're supposed to have equal or greater replacement debt on the new property. Spend the cash, yes, also equal or greater debt on the new property. Again, it's that incentive program to keep folks fully reinvested. And we do a lot of partial exchanges where they don't go in at $1.5 million, maybe they go in at $1.2 million. That's fine. We can do a partial exchange. We were targeting $1.5 million, they buy at $1.2 million because they want to take some cash and play with or whatever. They won't get the full benefit, the full reward of a 1031. If we sold for $1.5 million, we buy at $1.2 million, they're going to get taxed on $300,000.
The first piece of advice is to identify the property in which you wish to acquire, the value, and when the deal would have to close by. I would also recommend that you enlist the support of a 1031 exchange facilitator. Start working with and developing a relationship with the organization that's going to hold the easement. You need to learn as much as you can about one another. It's a huge degree of mutual trust. Have a realistic idea of what types of money you're talking about. And then, of course, in all of this, if you're, like in our case, family, is have everybody involved. I really think very few people like surprises.
Half of the conversations we hold in this office do not end up turning into a 1031 because of all the rules, and they decide there's too many rules. This tax code section has been in the code since 1921, so over 100 years. So it is a good provision. It is good for America, but there are a lot of rules if our client wants to take advantage of it. You know, the most important thing, and I'm going to say this a second time, is that if they're considering a 1031 exchange of an easement or any kind of real estate, it's just never premature to be talking to an exchange company to get the answers. Talk to their attorney, talk to their accountant for sure, but it's never too soon to be talking to us. And again, open the line of communication, phone, email, and we'd like to handhold and try to help achieve that personal goal or the business goal that they have for these sales that they're anticipating. So the sooner they're talking to us, the better.
The sun highlights the edges of small round leaves on the woody bitterbrush shrubs that grow densely packed across the ranch land. This program was created thanks to generous funding from AgWest Farm Credit, Harberton Foundation, Land Trust Alliance, and Roundhouse Foundation, logo for Oregon Agricultural Trust.